Welcome to the guest show. Today I'm very honored and happy to have Jonathan Tan. Jonathan runs a charity in Oxford called Greater Changes. Is that correct, Jonathan?
Yes, that's right.
Greater Changes, and we're going to hear about it. What changes are happening? So thank you for coming, Jonathan.
No, thank you very much for having me.
Okay, and tell me now tell me about your charity.
Yes, where do I start? So Greater Change was something that was started by my co-founder and my self in 2017, 2018 was when we first got the idea for it. But what we do is very simple. We didn't want to duplicate any existing frontline support work that's already there because we knew that there was good professional expertise already out there.
Mm.
But we wanted to find a way to meaningfully plug the gaps for people on the pathway out of homelessness. And what we often found was that these gaps are financial in nature. There were these barriers that were put up in people's way. So maybe you have the income to afford monthly rent, but you can't afford rent deposit and first month's rent up front. Maybe you just need, some work tools, right? And that's a classic example, isn't it? Because if you have the skills, you have to trade, and you have the customers, you might find yourself in a position where, and this happens quite a lot to a lot of our clients, where, you can't quite put the money together to get a good set of tools. So you end up buying bad tools, they break in no time, and then you end up putting more money into it over and over again. And so what we really wanted to do was to help people get the money that they need to buy the good tools, to really help them to take the next steps that they wanted to take out of homelessness on their terms, giving them the dignity of choice, to let them choose how they want to get out of homelessness. And so, very simply put, Greater Change provides people with some light touch financial planning support, and then we give you the money that you need, to take the next steps out, working jointly, of course, as I said, with, brilliant local partner charities, whose frontline support workers help us to make sure that we are distributing the funds, responsibly. So that's in short what Greater Change does. And we support over 900 people so far across the Southeast. So we started in Oxford. We now also work in London, Essex, West Sussex.
Huh.
We have a small trial running up north as well, near Durham. And yeah, we're sort of very glad to be able to do this work, really. And yeah, thank you for letting me come on and introduce the concept of what we do.
Well, as you know, I keep on looking, and I think it was on LinkedIn, which has
Hmm.
been a great resource for me. Um, I see people, I contact them, I ask them. Not everybody says yes. Can't see why I'm such a nice person, but I do believe everybody has a right to say no.
Hmm.
You also spoke about accommodation, that you were taking them out of temporary accommodation to
Hmm.
permanent accommodation.
That's right.
Easy as that in today's environment.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. So certainly we know that there's not enough affordable housing out there. So it makes the job much more difficult than it otherwise would be. But nevertheless, I think what we find is that even when you can find affordable accommodation, very often you're the winner of cards you can't play. You can't actually access the accommodation without rent deposit.
Mm,
Let's say you've won the lottery and you've been assigned social housing, and these days it really is like winning the lottery, isn't it? Because it's so difficult to get to the front of the queue for social housing. You might move in and you find the place is completely bare. There are no white goods. The flooring's been ripped out, and we've seen these, I think we've all seen these. If you're listening to this podcast, you might be probably a sector expert, and we've all seen these, right? Like the, flooring where if you try to walk on it barefoot, you cut your feet on it. And then that's not a home, is it? It's a shell. So, what we find is that you're certainly correct. There is definitely a housing shortage, but I think affordable housing shortage, I should say. I want to clarify there, and we can
mm.
talk about it some more. I'd love to talk to you some more about that. But because there are enough dwellings in this country for everyone, but not enough affordable housing.
I,
So,
I,
yeah,
I
go
was
on.
going to tell you, I'm going to share you a story.
Hmm.
You know, in my 100 years of life, I've seen lots of things. I remember I was placed, I don't know why they chose me to do this, as a resettlement worker in a young people's hostel. And young people do not have this is under 24, they don't have access to the clearinghouse, which is, I think, stupid. So those people know that in London anyway, I think it was St Mungo's at the time ran something called the clearinghouse. They find you properties to live with. I went through the clearinghouse to find a property, but I always remember the day I arrived I was only doing a few days a week at this hostel, and there were about 104 residents. They said they wanted to get rid of a dozen because they've been there over 2 years. Normally, you're not supposed to be in the hostel for two. 2 years is the max.
Mm.
And they says, young boy's going to see this place down in Lewisham. So he got on a bus, he went to see the place. I always remember we went upstairs to see this place. The floor was full of sawdust. All right. There was a community kitchen. There's those of stores I've told about that day. There's some bloke walked in. He was definitely, he came with nobody, this one. He said, this is my place. I'm on the
Mm.
street. But if somebody gave me the choice, what you said about suitable housing, no, and when I came out of hospital last year, and I've been here 2 years, no,
Mm.
over 2 years ago, I've been here a year now. Um, I went to see two places. One was definitely a death trap,
Yeah.
and there were quite a few people in the queue to see that. And the other one was supposed to be a first floor, ground floor thing, 'cause I can't do stairs, but it was another death trap. And that's the problem with housing. I just want to share that. So when you said about suitable, it
Yeah.
reminds me of that point.
Yeah.
Mhm. So
Yeah.
who finds these properties for you? Is it your partner organization or yourselves?
Yeah, it's partner organizations. So as mentioned, we're pretty adamant and stubborn about the fact that we don't want to do any of the existing support work that's already being done.
Mm,
And the reason for that is because A, we couldn't do it as well. And B, even if we could, it's just fundamentally worse for the client. Ian, I'm sure you've heard all these stories before. But the most common complaint you hear from service users is they feel passed around like a parcel, from one service to another, right?
mm.
Um, we just don't want to add to that chaos. Yeah.
Well, the
Why,
one I
why
hear,
do?
the
Yeah.
one I hear the most, and on the one of the panels I'm on the expert link, a few have even said it, is every time they've seen another worker, they got to repeat that whole story again.
Hmm.
Even though it's been and that is soul destroying, in my
Yeah.
opinion. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Jonathan, I'm gonna ask a negative question. Don't like being negative, but have you any times when you found somebody you thought great, they're suitable for your program, but they're not really, it's a face that was suitable. The reality is their trauma makes them not suitable. Have you ever had
Mm.
that sort of situation?
I think the answer to that is no, actually.
Hmm.
So, in our experience so far, we are quite happy to work with clients all along the homelessness pathway. That is to say, we're very happy to meet people where they are. So, no matter what the current situation is, as long as we can see a pathway out, or they can see a pathway out, I should say, that they want to take, and with some support, obviously, from their key worker and us, we can put together a plan to help them try to achieve it. Now, I will say I'll answer the question in a slightly different way because certainly I should clarify it's not like what we do has 100% success rate, right? So there are certainly cases where, and I don't like to use the term failure because I think that sort of makes it sound like the person will never move out of homelessness ever again. I mean, the truth is we don't know what's going to happen. Like for now, so what we say is 86% of the people that we support have so far been able to sustain their move on into stable housing 12 months on. The 14% who have been unable to do that, they've been unable to do that for now, right? You don't know what's going to happen to them in a couple of years' time. And
Mm.
that's not just me putting an optimistic spin on things. I think that's just the truth. It's the fact that everyone is on their own journey and they take time. Now, to answer your question more directly, because what we're really after here is say what are the limitations of our theory of change, right? And we're very aware of what those limitations are, and we've grown more aware over time. So I can give you an example of a gentleman we were helping in Oxford. He was quite a prominent rough sleeper. I won't name him.
Yeah.
He's doing quite well now, thankfully. But actually, what had
Inspector
happened?
Morse. Yeah, go on.
Sorry.
Inspector Morse, you mean?
Yes, yes, indeed. Yeah, it's him. We'll call him Inspector Morse. So Inspector Morse, he was doing he wasn't doing too well, to be honest. He had been quite entrenched in rough sleeping for years. We then raised enough money for him to fund his rent deposit, and move on. But the truth is his life was just too chaotic at the time,
Mm.
right? Very sadly, his partner had passed away on the streets. It happens very often, much more often than people think. It's dangerous, isn't it? And that led him to have a pretty negative downward spiral, more so than the entrenched years of rough sleeping had done to him. So he's just not really in the right place. And eventually what happened was he was assigned a place in a housing first scheme in Oxfordshire. That gave him the leg up that he needed to build that stable platform, right?
Mm.
And I've had coffee with him since, he's doing well. And I'm glad, basically, right? I'm happy that he was able to find the move on that he needed. But the truth was that we could not afford to give him anywhere close to what essentially a housing first scheme gives you.
Mm.
Unconditional housing as a human right. That's fantastic, right? So I think there are definitely different bits of our theory of change that, there are different bits of limitation to our theory of change. We're not, as I said, we're not giving people unconditional housing.
Mm.
I think what we're doing is complementary to other services, and that very often it is enough, although not always, right? Like there are definitely cases where lots more resources and support will be necessary. Um, but I think what we're trying to show is that actually that's, less often than you think. Actually, very often, if you give people a bit of dignity of choice, you let them choose how they want to get out of homelessness, let them tell you what they need, look at their strengths and play to those. Um, Actually, it works out quite well most of the time.
It is because really you said complimentary. And there's no I know one guy in the first year I was on the street. He was the first person I met when I went into it. And he was a nice guy. And then he kept on disappearing. I wondered where. And then somebody said, oh, he's found the place. Then he was back on the street. And the last time, I haven't seen him for years, but I remember I went to Christ at Christmas, and then you had to go to what was then, it doesn't exist anymore, the P&O building to register. And my friend, and he had actually gone to move up to Swindon. And we went and they said, go for the quiet shelter. Ask for that, we'll all be there then. Like, I got a nice group of guys.
Yeah. I'm so sorry.
That's all right. I thought I was sneezing this morning. So I sent it to you. And I remember I was sitting there, just sitting, waiting for the minibus to take us. Tap on the shoulder, it was him. I said, what are you doing here? He said, well, I've rented out my total lie. I've rented out my place. I'm here for Christmas to be with the gang, guys. I remember one thing I was embarrassed of though. They called out the people that go on this minibus, and me and him weren't included. He threw a wobbly straight away, like, uh, yeah, I was embarrassed. But then I discovered after we got out the night shelter, he didn't go back to Swindon because some of them are. I've known a few guys who were entrenched, and I respected them for that. I knew by the October of that first year I wanted to get off the street. I didn't know how. But it is this thing of how far I've looked at this housing first scheme. I want to bring somebody on to talk about it. It's finding
Mm.
people now. And it's a good idea, because in the theory was you get them well, then you found them housing. Doesn't work, I think. Hostels are not the ideal environment, in my opinion. So your referrals come through your partner organizations. Am I correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. And what do? Do you just say, whoever it is, bang, we start straight? Well, do you have an interview with them?
Well, so what we do is, as mentioned, and this is, I'm glad you asked this because what we do is we don't directly interview the client in the first instance.
Mm.
And again, this is a part of the fact that, we don't want them to have to re-explain everything that they've been through to us, a stranger. So what we do in the first instance is we talk to their support workers. And so the support workers then, apply their judgment to refer people to us with their consent, obviously. So they'll tell the client something like, hey, there's this grant that's opening up. I'm going to apply on your behalf. I'm going to send them some information about yourself, just sort of context, etc. So sort of that initial conversation happens between the support worker and us so that it doesn't put more of a burden on the client. In the latter stages of the application, then yes, what we want to do is we want to trigger the conversation between the support worker and the client to say, and this is a support worker at our partner charities. Again, it's not our support worker, it's just the partner charity key worker that is already working with the client. We want to trigger them to have that conversation to say, oh, well, how would you like to get out of homelessness? What do you want to do, and on what terms? And by getting them to have that conversation, and again, we can be a part of the conversation. We don't have to be. It depends on what's most suitable on a case by case basis. The support worker can then send that information on to us. We offer some challenge if necessary. But then, very simply put, we then transfer the money to the partner charity and the support worker, and then they can go jointly make the purchase together. So I guess to answer your question, there is very little interaction between us and the client, especially at the start of the relationship, and that's on purpose, right?
Mm.
Because if we try to stick our hands in there straight away, we think it's not really appropriate.
I would say, yeah, because some of the people have need. Okay. So they meet you, all of a sudden you're the angel. I'll use that word. And if you meet them too early before any progress is made, they'll be focused on you and not on the support worker. Does that sound correct? The way I picture it? Sorry,
Yeah,
Jonathan.
exactly. Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So your support worker refers you to us, and the money goes through the support worker again as well. And the important thing is to have a very client-led conversation
Mm.
about how they want to get out of homelessness. But our involvement could be very, very light. It could be quite heavy if they would like it to be. But that's sort of changes on a case by case basis, right? But the idea is to have that conversation, however is most appropriate, and then we sort of put the plan in place and provide the cash to execute the plan to the support worker.
For those who are new to the podcast, as you probably realize, I do audio only because I'm too scary to go on the camera. And when Jonathan was nodding, I'm thinking, hold on a minute, this is how we would be talking to each other if we were doing a video.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, just a nod would be enough. I think it's very your project, if I use that word,
Mhm.
your scheme is an incredible scheme. So what's the future?
It's again I think so. It's a great question. I think the future holds a couple of things. As mentioned before we started the podcast, I'm an optimist. Okay, so I think that the future is the government seeing the evidence that we're creating out of our project to show that personalized budgets like these really work very well. So we think that the future is the government taking on this kind of support service as a statutory part of social services, right? So we want every frontline support worker in this country to have access to discretionary, personalized budgets that their clients can access through them with very minimal bureaucracy, very minimal admin. I think that's a key qualifier. Okay. Um, and in that way, they can flexibly plug the gaps on the pathway out of homelessness. We think this is great for the individual, but actually it's also great for the government and the social fabric in general. I mean, we can tell, there are many, many local authorities at the moment going bankrupt, because the bills that they have to pay for temporary accommodation are skyrocketing, right? So we think that the hope and the plan is to try to convince local authorities and central government to work with us to implement a scheme like that. And in the long run, if we can work ourselves out of a job and make ourselves redundant, we couldn't be happier, right? That's the goal. That's the goal. Between now and achieving that goal, I think there's quite a lot of work to do.
There is. It's like
Yeah.
as somebody I know, Matt Downey, Crisis's goal is to end homelessness. I've said
Right.
I can't see it ending. Even the government has said, well, in 2019, part of their mandate was to end homelessness by 2025. I'm still getting the stuff from the press office that says that very same thing.
Mm.
I can't see it won't happen in 2025. There's not enough. There's got to be like schemes like yours, housing first, that sort of schemes have to really take over. They're not. And
Yeah.
that brings my final question, really, and I'm sorry to say this, it's a horrible question. What barriers are there? What barriers do you see?
It's funding. I think and it always goes back down to funding, doesn't it? Because I think it's a demonstration, I guess, of will and how seriously we take this problem as a society. We need to be spending money on stuff that works in order to fix the problem.
Hmm.
So much money at the moment is being spent on managing the problem of homelessness, and not enough is spent on solving it. The classic case really is temporary accommodation, isn't it? I don't mean to keep harping on that point, but it's just true. I mean, this year, the estimates are that local authorities are going to spend £2.1 billion on temporary accommodation alone. So we're not even talking about the admin of putting people into TA, and in that sort of revolving door of TA and rough sleeping, right? We're not talking about any administrative costs, any support service costs. Just TA alone is going to cost £2.1 billion. I
Yeah,
mean, that's a
last year
huge
it was.
waste of money, isn't it? I mean, if you imagine if we could actually put people in social housing, funding services that actually work. So,
I
so the barrier is funding. Mm.
yeah, actually last year it was quoted at 1.7, so it's gone up about £500,000. Half
Yes,
a
it
billion.
has. Yeah. Have a billion. Yeah. Have a
And
billion. It's a
I have
billion
experienced
B.
the
Yeah.
accommodation, which I spoke about when I had Shannon on. And my name for where I lived in temporary accommodation is when I came out of hospital, they put me into a place where I needed help because I couldn't walk. Through several reasons, my social worker decided to evict me once I could walk. And if not for crisis, I admit I might not be here because my mobility
Yeah.
isn't great. But the place I ended up in, my nickname for it was the tip. There were so many things wrong with that place. Like, uh, each room had a double bed. You had very little room to move around with. And it's one thing I think and I feel it happens is some of these organizations that provide the temporary accommodation are not interested in the people. It's the money that's coming in. There's lots of money, as you said before.
Mm.
I don't know what the solution is. Well, I know what the solution is. More proper, suitable accommodation. But some people get like there's TA, I heard somebody's been there over 10 years. There was an article in the papers, children have lived all their lives in temporary accommodation.
Yep. Yep. It's horrifying.
It is horrifying, but thank you very much, Jonathan. I want to say thank you for coming.
No worries at all.
What I'd like you to do is maybe I always put something extra in the wording. I don't, I'll call it greater change. But what's the greater change that's needed?
Mhm.
How do you come at the title?
You have to ask my co-founder Alex for that, but I think he just thought it sounded good.
Well, as a writer, when I do stories or plays, it's the title. I get an idea, and all of a sudden, I really work off a title.
Mm.
And and it's a great title. What I'd like to do is send me a link to email me the link to your website
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that'll go out with the podcast. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. These are the sort of things I look at. I don't,
Yeah.
as I was talking today, I wrote something today because somebody was saying how good interview I'm. I don't think I am. I'm a conversationalist. I know how to talk to people.
Mm.
But what I do believe, I don't deal with fluff, as I say.
Mm.
I don't deal with easy subjects. You know, I won't have football on because I know the best football team is. So why tell me another
Yeah.
team better? But what's important is that people need help. And the only way we can get help, well, the government is the prime example, but I personally feel our present government is not even, I don't think any government will. Homelessness is something that people want to see disappearing, personally. I mean, like from the government, because it doesn't look good. I don't know if you have any points on that. Do you agree with me? You can disagree.
I think I disagree. I think I hold on to hope that I think it is now an issue that is so drastically obvious. It needs fundamental change to solve that I hope, we will take meaningful action as a society. I guess we won't know for at least a couple of years more
Well,
before
any
that will
government
happen.
that comes in after the general election will now have 5 years to clean up the previous mess.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. It was funny, the Conservatives were actually saying about 6 months ago they're blaming Labour, who hadn't been in power for 15 years.
Yeah,
But it could take
exactly.
10 years to clear up any mess. And we are
Yeah.
a mess. But I'm going to leave it on that note, um, Jonathan. I hope
Yeah.
that's. I'm a positive person, but when I think about my own story and other people I know, it's difficult. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Um, I do this every Monday. I have a different person to talk about. Got some incredible people coming up. I'm going to do something on runaways of the under 17s. I've got two women. This will be the first time I have two guests. Going to talk about that.
Yeah.
I know one person's story. I don't know the other person's story yet, but you'll hear it. This is these are real stories we're talking about. Jonathan spoke about that guy, you know, his partner passed away and all that. You don't realize the little things that people need. If
Mm.
you are interested in this, I run a mailing list. There's no charge for the mailing list. I am thinking about setting up a Patreon thing. I don't know what I'm going to offer in the Patreon thing because, as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to offer you, if you come on the mailing list, you'll get notification of each podcast 24 hours before. Like, and it's just my words. Plus, I always put some some news in the emails, but I also have a monthly newsletter which tells what's happening. And an idea I've got, I'm going to say it now, and I'll probably send out an email next week about it in May. I plan to have a group Zoom with whoever wants to come. Because it's great. I hear from people how good I am, and they're right, I'm good. But maybe there's areas I haven't looked at. There's so many areas in this I've covered. Mental health, so mental health, drugs, politics, and housing. And it's only just started. And now we've got how this comes under the housing banner. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you. Thanks, Ian. All
And
righty.
yeah, bye.